Chapter 5. Unscheduled Recalculations. The alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at precisely 5:30 a.m., as it had every morning for the past decade of Eleanor Washington's meticulously structured life. Her hand moved automatically to silence it, muscle memory so ingrained that consciousness wasn't required for the action. Day 29. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, her usual immediate rise to action strangely absent. Beside her, Peanut snored softly, his small body radiating disproportionate heat against her side. The dachshund had been uncharacteristically agreeable upon their return from the bookstore yesterday, settling into his evening routine without the usual stubborn resistance.
"Traitor,"
she murmured, the accusation lacking any real heat.
"one taste of bookstore freedom and you're a changed dog."
Peanut's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but he made no move to rise, clearly expecting the extra 5 minutes that had somehow become part of their morning negotiation. The red digits of her alarm clock blinked accusingly. 5:34. She was already behind schedule. Eleanor swung her legs over the side of the bed, the familiar routine resuming its mechanical rhythm. Teeth brushed, hair pulled back, running clothes retrieved from their designated drawer. Each action performed with the same precision as always, yet something felt subtly different. As she filled Peanut's water bowl, her gaze drifted to the kitchen calendar where she'd meticulously recorded her job search activities. Friday's schedule was already mapped out. 8 to 10. Update resume for Mercer & Doyle application. 10 to noon. Research TexCorp executive team. Noon to 12:30. Lunch. 12:30 to 2:30. Networking follow-ups. 2:30 to 4. Skills assessment for public defender position. No interviews, no cornerstone books. The thought landed with unexpected weight.
"Don't look at me like that."
She addressed Peanut, who had finally deigned to join her in the kitchen.
"I can't drop him as a doggy daycare just because you enjoyed your little adventure. It was a temporary arrangement."
Peanut tilted his head, ears perked forward in what she could have sworn was skepticism.
"The fact that I'm justifying my schedule to a dog is deeply concerning."
Outside, the morning greeted them with uncharacteristic warmth for early spring. Eleanor adjusted her pace to accommodate the higher temperature, her thoughts drifting as her feet traced their familiar path along the riverside. Yesterday's interview replayed in her mind, a perfectly adequate professional performance that had nonetheless left her feeling strangely hollow. She'd given them exactly what they wanted: competent, careful, controlled. The Eleanor Washington who had excelled at Hargrove and Associates before workforce optimization had rendered her expertise redundant. But as she rounded the bend that would lead them to Madison Street Dog Park, an unbidden image surfaced. Leo crouched beside the small boy who had knocked over the books, transforming potential shame into creative problem-solving. No recrimination, no stress, just adaptation and forward movement.
"Different worlds,"
she murmured as she and Peanut approached the dog park entrance.
"Completely different worlds."
Peanut strained at his leash as they entered the gate, his gaze sweeping the enclosed space with clear purpose. His small body deflated visibly when he didn't find what or who he was looking for.
"They don't come every day, apparently."
She unclipped his leash, watching as he trotted toward a cluster of other dogs, his enthusiasm noticeably diminished.
"Earth to Ellie. You in there?"
Eleanor turned to find Maggie beside her, Bailey sitting obediently at her friend's feet.
"Sorry, distracted."
"Clearly. I've been standing here for at least 30 seconds. That's an eternity in Eleanor Washington time units."
Eleanor managed a smile, accepting the gentle teasing for what it was. Concern wrapped in humor, Maggie's preferred delivery method.
"Just thinking about yesterday's interview."
"And? Don't keep me in suspense. Will you be rejoining the ranks of the employed and abandoning me to solo dog park duty?"
"They'll decide by next week."
"That's not what I asked. How do you feel about it?"
The question caught Eleanor off guard, Her mind had been so focused on the mechanics of the job search, applications submitted, interviews secured, follow-ups sent, that she'd barely considered her actual feelings about the positions themselves.
It's a good firm, stable, reputable.
You sound like you're describing a retirement account, not your future career.
In this economy, those qualities matter.
So does waking up not hating your life.
Maggie studied her friend's face with the assessing gaze that had undoubtedly served her well as an emergency room physician.
Something's different about you this morning.
Sleep deprivation. Existential crisis. The usual job search cocktail.
No, it's something else.
Her eyes narrowed.
You met someone.
What? No, absolutely not.
Your immediate denial only confirms my suspicion.
I'm not denying anything. I'm stating a fact. Dating is the last thing on my mind right now.
Who said anything about dating? I just said you met someone.
Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks, cursing her fair complexion that had always betrayed her emotions no matter how carefully she tried to conceal them.
I've been interviewing. I've met dozens of people.
Uh-huh. And which of those dozens of corporate drones made you blush like that?
I'm not.
She stopped herself, aware that further protest would only deepen Maggie's conviction.
I needed someone to watch Peanut during my interview. The owner of that bookstore we pass on Monroe Street offered to help.
The cute one with the husky? I've seen him here.
He's not, yes, that one.
And
nothing. He watched Peanut. I had my interview. End of story.
That's why you're blushing. Checking the park for him. And Peanut looks like someone cancelled Christmas.
Eleanor glanced at her dog, who had abandoned his half-hearted socialization attempts and was now sitting near the gate, staring forlornly in the direction they had come from.
He's just tired.
Right. And I'm just casually observing that in 10 years of friendship, I've never seen you blush over a professional acquaintance.
Can we change the subject? How's work?
Fine. But my love life is decidedly less interesting than whatever you're not telling me.
Eleanor checked her watch, grateful for the excuse to end this line of questioning.
I need to get going. Applications to complete. Rejections to anticipate.
Don't forget dinner tomorrow, 7 o'clock. My place. And I expect a full report on this nothing with the bookstore owner.
There's nothing to...
Save it for tomorrow. Bring wine.
As Eleanor jogged home, Peanut trailing with uncharacteristic lethargy, she found her thoughts returning to Cornerstone Books, to Apollo's gentle presence, to Leo's easy manner with the children, to the comfortable chaos that somehow felt more welcoming than the ordered sterility she'd cultivated in her own life. Back in her apartment, Eleanor moved through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, laptop open. The familiar rhythm of keys as she updated her resume for what felt like the 100th time in 29 days. Peanut settled under her desk with a heavy sigh, his usual morning nap commencing without protest. Eleanor tried to focus on tailoring her experience to Mercer and Doyle's specific needs, but her mind kept drifting. To the bookstore with its creaky floors and comforting scent of paper and coffee. To the man who had transformed a knocked-over display into a creative opportunity rather than a problem to be fixed. By mid-morning, she had made frustratingly little progress. Her usual laser focus was somewhere else entirely, and the knowledge only increased her irritation with herself.
This is ridiculous,
she announced to the empty room.
I met the man twice. Twice.
Peanut raised his head at her outburst, eyes blinking sleepily.
Don't give me that look. You're part of the problem. With your interspecies friendship and your bookstore adaptability.
The dachshund's tail thumped once against the floor, the canine equivalent of an eye roll. Eleanor turned back to her laptop, determination renewed. She would focus. She would complete today's schedule as planned. She would not think about Cornerstone Books or its owner or the unfamiliar warmth that had bloomed in her chest when he'd smiled at her over the chaos of story hour. 20 minutes later, she was staring at the same paragraph she'd been attempting to revise, having made exactly 0 progress.
This is not happening,
she muttered, pushing back from her desk. Peanut perked up immediately, sensing a deviation from routine.
Don't get excited. I'm just getting more coffee.
But in the kitchen, standing before the coffee maker, Eleanor found herself reaching for her phone instead. Before she could overthink it, she pulled up the number for Cornerstone Books, a number she absolutely should not have memorized after seeing it just once on Leo's business card. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered.
Cornerstone Books, where happy endings are only guaranteed in romance novels.
The greeting startled a laugh from Eleanor.
Is that your standard business greeting?
Ellie, I change it daily. Yesterday was Cornerstone Books, solving crimes in every genre except self-help.
She could hear the smile in his voice, could picture the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners.
Very professional.
I save professionalism for tax audits and funeral homes. What can I do for you this fine Friday morning? Peanut having withdrawal symptoms?
Eleanor glanced down to find the dachshund sitting at her feet, head tilted as if he recognized the voice on the phone and was waiting for confirmation.
Actually,
She hesitated, suddenly uncertain why she'd called.
I realized I never properly thanked you for yesterday.
The pleasure was entirely Apollo's. He's been moping since you left. Actual canine depression. I'm considering therapy.
I find that hard to believe.
The moping or the therapy?
Both.
Well, judge for yourself. He's currently lying on Peanut's designated cushion, sighing dramatically every few minutes. It's quite the performance.
Eleanor smiled, despite herself. She could hear background noise, the gentle murmur of customers, the faint chime of the doorbell.
You sound busy. I should let you go.
Moderately busy. Friday morning rush. People stocking up on weekend reading material before retreating to their caves for 48 hours of introvert recharging.
Is that what you do on weekends? Recharge your introvert batteries?
Actually, Saturday is my volunteer day, reading program at the Children's Hospital.
The casual mention of this volunteer work landed like a small revelation. Of course he worked with children. Of course he used his weekends to give back. It fit perfectly with everything she was learning about this man who seemed to move through the world with such different priorities than her own.
That's really admirable.
It's selfish, actually. Those kids are the toughest literary critics you'll ever meet. If you can hold their attention through a story, you know it's good.
A small commotion in the background interrupted whatever Eleanor might have said next.
Sorry, book emergency. Mrs. Patterson needs the new Colleen Hoover immediately, or her book club will disown her.
I should let you go.
Actually,
There was a pause, a moment of what sounded like hesitation.
I was going to call you later. Apollo really has been pathetic without his new friend. Any chance Peanut might want another bookstore adventure today?
Eleanor glanced at her meticulously organized schedule, at the resume waiting for revisions, at the networking emails drafted but not sent.
I don't have an interview today.
I know, but the offer stands regardless. No obligation. Just if you wanted.
The words hung between them, an invitation without pressure, a possibility rather than an expectation. She closed her eyes briefly, an internal battle raging between the structure she'd built her life around and the unexpected pull of something new.
That would be nice, actually. If you're sure.
Absolutely sure. Apollo will be ecstatic. His tail might actually achieve liftoff.
What time would be good?
We're open until 6, but come whenever works for you. No schedule necessary.
The concept, no schedule necessary, was so foreign to Eleanor's way of operating that she almost laughed.
I'll aim for around 11 if that works.
Perfect. We'll be here. Well, unless aliens invade or the shop is suddenly swallowed by a dimensional portal. But barring supernatural intervention, definitely here.
After they said goodbye, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, phone still in hand, a strange lightness expanding in her chest. Peanut watched her with newfound interest, as if sensing the change in plans.
Don't look so smug.
She told him, though she couldn't muster any real admonishment.
This is just a different approach to the day. Flexibility is a professional skill.
The dachshund's expression suggested he wasn't buying this justification any more than she was. As Eleanor changed into jeans and a casual sweater, another deviation from her usual workday attire, she tried not to examine too closely why the prospect of returning to Cornerstone Books had instantly brightened her mood, or why the sound of Leo's voice had sent a small thrill through her system that had nothing to do with professional networking. Different worlds, she reminded herself. Completely different worlds. Cornerstone Books was busier than Eleanor had expected for a Friday morning. As she pushed open the door, bell chiming cheerfully above, she had to navigate around a cluster of customers browsing a newly arranged display near the entrance. The store hummed with quiet activity. A woman lost in a book in one of the armchairs. An elderly man examining the spines in the mystery section. A young couple huddled over a large atlas open on a reading table. Through it all moved Leo, carrying a stack of books, pausing to answer a question here, make a recommendation there, his relaxed demeanor unchanged despite the multiple demands on his attention. Apollo spotted them first, his head rising from his cushion near the counter, ears perking forward. The husky's entire body seemed to light up, tail sweeping in wide, enthusiastic arcs as he rose and trotted over to greet them. Peanut strained at his leash, an excited whine escaping his usually dignified demeanor. Eleanor unclipped him, watching as the two dogs touched noses in greeting before Apollo led his smaller friend toward the back of the store, clearly with some canine agenda in mind.
I told you, ecstatic.
Leo appeared beside her, shelving momentarily abandoned. Today's sweater was a faded gray blue that somehow intensified the color of his eyes behind those wire-rimmed glasses.
I was starting to think you might have changed your mind.
Traffic was heavier than I expected.
The lie slipped out automatically, covering for the 45 minutes she'd spent second-guessing her decision before finally leaving her apartment.
Well, you're here now, and just in time. We have a mouse situation that requires Peanut's specialist skills.
Please tell me you're joking.
Dorothy has apparently invited extended family for a reunion. Multiple sightings behind the historical fiction section.
And you want Peanut to... what? Create chaos in your store? Again?
I was thinking more along the lines of authoritative dachshund presence. Mice don't need to be caught to be deterred. Sometimes just knowing a professional is on the premises is enough.
Eleanor couldn't help but smile at his framing of the situation.
You have a unique approach to pest control.
I have a unique approach to most things. Keeps life interesting.
He gestured toward the back of the store.
Come on, let me show you today's most debated display before I get pulled back into book emergency triage.
He led her to a corner she hadn't noticed during her previous visits, where a table displayed an eclectic collection under a sign reading, "Books That Changed Minds."
My weekly experiment in literary provocation. These are all works that fundamentally shifted cultural or scientific paradigms.
Eleanor examined the diverse selection, scientific texts alongside poetry, ancient philosophy next to modern memoirs.
Interesting curation.
That's diplomatic phrasing for what an odd collection.
Not at all. It's just not how most bookstores would group things.
Most bookstores want to make shopping efficient. I want to make discovery inevitable.
Before Eleanor could respond, a customer approached, asking about a special order. Leo excused himself with an apologetic smile, leaving her to explore the store at her leisure. Eleanor wandered through the shelves, finding herself drawn to sections she'd normally bypass. When you need courage but can't find any, featured an unlikely combination of war memoirs and children's fantasy novels. For those who feel like Outsiders contained everything from classic science fiction to contemporary essays on immigration. Each categorization revealed something about the mind behind it. a way of seeing literature not as isolated genres, but as companions for specific human experiences. It was curatorial work that required both deep reading and deeper empathy. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Eleanor found herself settling into the rhythm of the store. She claimed an armchair near Apollo's cushion, where Peanut had also made himself comfortable, and pulled a book from the nearest shelf without checking the title. The simple act of reading without purpose, not for work, not for information, but for pleasure, felt like a forgotten luxury. Occasionally, she'd glance up to watch Leo interact with his customers. He had a gift for meeting each person exactly where they were, discussing literary theory with a professor type in a tweed jacket, then seamlessly shifting to graphic novel recommendations for a shy teenager. No persona, no performance, just authentic engagement that shifted naturally with each interaction. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she'd watched someone so perfectly at ease in their own environment. At Hargrove and Associates, everyone, herself included, had worn their professionalism like armor, calibrating every interaction to project competence and control. Even in supposedly casual settings, the calculation never fully disappeared.
Enjoying Catherine Hales?
Eleanor started, realizing Leo had approached while she was lost in thought.
I'm sorry?
The book.
He gestured to the volume in her lap, which she realized she'd been holding open to the same page for at least 10 minutes.
Haley's is brilliant but dense, not usually casual afternoon reading.
Eleanor glanced down at the title. How We Became Posthuman, Virtual Bodies and Cybernetics, Literature and Informatics.
I just grabbed whatever was closest.
She closed the book, feeling oddly embarrassed.
I wasn't really reading it.
Contemplating the deeper mysteries of the universe instead?
Just observing.
And what have you observed?
You're very good at this.
At what precisely?
At connecting with people, with books, matching them together.
Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at her direct assessment.
Books are easy. They tell you exactly what they are if you pay attention. People are trickier, but the principle is the same.
What principle?
That everyone's looking for recognition. Not just to be seen, but to be seen accurately.
He leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed loosely.
Most people go through life feeling slightly misunderstood, slightly mistranslated. Finding the right book for someone is just saying, I see you clearly enough to know what might speak to you.
The insight landed with unexpected weight. How long had it been since Eleanor had felt truly seen? Not her credentials, not her professional persona, but her actual self?
Sorry.
He straightened, looking suddenly self-conscious.
Occupational hazard. Bookstore philosophers are the worst.
No, it's a lovely way to think about it.
A small silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but charged with something Eleanor couldn't quite name.
I was about to close for lunch. There's a great little cafe around the corner if you and Peanut would like to join Apollo and me.
The invitation was casual, his tone giving her every opportunity to decline without awkwardness. A perfect exit ramp if she wanted it.
That sounds nice.
Great. Let me just put up the back in 30 minutes sign and we can head out.
As Leo moved to the front door, flipping the sign and retrieving Apollo's leash from behind the counter, Eleanor gathered her things. She watched as he spoke briefly with the few remaining customers, his manner unhurried, despite literally closing the shop around them.
Don't you worry about lost sales?
The books will still be here in 30 minutes, and hungry booksellers make poor recommendations.
A practical business philosophy.
My accountant would beg to differ, but he also wears ties on weekends, so his judgment is suspect in all areas.
Outside, the spring day had blossomed into full warmth, the sky a clear, uninterrupted blue. They walked side by side, dogs trotting ahead of them, Peanut doing his best to match Apollo's longer stride.
Fair warning. This place is possibly the best curried chickpea wrap in the city. Life-changing culinary experience. You may develop an inconvenient addiction.
Noted. I'll approach with appropriate caution.
How's the job search going? If that's not an intrusive question.
Eleanor appreciated that he prefaced it as optional, a courtesy she'd received surprisingly rarely during her weeks of unemployment.
Ongoing. Williams and Reed will let me know next week. I have a few other applications pending.
All corporate law?
Mostly. Though I've applied for a fellowship at the Public Defender's Office as well.
Really? That's quite a shift from corporate work.
Something in his tone made Eleanor glance at him.
You sound surprised.
Pleasantly so. Public defense is challenging work. Important, but not exactly known for its work-life balance or financial rewards.
Which is why it's Plan B.
Ah,
That single syllable carried a weight of meaning that prickled at Eleanor's skin.
What?
nothing, just ah.
That wasn't just that was with subtext.
Leo smiled, the expression both amused and slightly apologetic.
I just find it interesting that the work you called important is your backup plan, rather than your first choice.
Eleanor felt a flare of defensiveness, sharper than the situation warranted.
Some of us don't have the luxury of making career choices based solely on what feels meaningful.
Fair point.
Financial stability isn't some bourgeois construct. It's a necessity.
I completely agree.
And corporate law can be meaningful too. The right firm, the right cases, you can make a real difference.
I believe you.
His easy agreement only fueled Eleanor's irritation. She stopped walking, causing Leo to pause beside her.
Why do I feel like you're judging my choices?
I'm not judging anything. I asked a question. You answered. That's the extent of it.
Your suggested otherwise.
Leo considered her for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive.
You're right. There was judgment in my response, but not of you.
He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair.
I spent years in a high-paying corporate environment that I thought was important because of the numbers involved, the prestige, the status. I told myself it mattered, and for some people, maybe it does. But for me,
He trailed off, looking past her at some middle distance.
let's just say I recognize the calculations people make when they prioritize stability over purpose.
Something in his words struck too close to Eleanor's own unacknowledged concerns, triggering a defensive reaction she couldn't quite control.
That's incredibly presumptuous. You don't know me. You don't know my situation. You've built this entire narrative about my motivations based on what? 2 conversations and a career choice you personally rejected?
You're right. That was presumptuous.
His immediate acceptance of her criticism caught her off guard.
I apologize.
Eleanor had prepared for further debate, for the typical masculine doubling down she'd encountered so often in her professional life. His straightforward acknowledgement left her momentarily adrift.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, I think you'd be exceptional at either path. Corporate law or public defense. You've got that precise mind, that attention to detail. The kind of focus that makes for a devastatingly effective advocate.
The genuine appreciation in his assessment simultaneously soothed and disoriented her. How could he see these qualities in her after such limited interaction? And why did his opinion matter at all?
You can't possibly know that.
Remember what I said about seeing people accurately? It's my other occupational hazard.
Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Apollo and Peanut, who had been waiting with surprising patience during this exchange, decided the conversation had gone on long enough. The husky gave a soft woof, while Peanut began circling Eleanor's legs in a clear signal that it was time to continue their journey.
The canine contingent has spoken. Lunch awaits.
They resumed walking, the momentary tension not entirely dissipated, but somehow transformed. As they approached the small cafe with its outdoor seating area, Eleanor found herself acutely aware of the fundamental difference between them, not just in career choices or financial priorities, but in basic orientation to the world. Leo moved through life with an openness she found both admirable and terrifying. He asked questions without apparent fear of the answers. He adapted to interruptions rather than resisting them. He seemed to find value in exactly where he was, rather than measuring everything against where he might be going. It was foreign to Eleanor's entire way of being. And yet, in watching him, in experiencing the unexpected ease of his company, she felt a disquieting pull towards something she'd never allowed herself to consider: a life built around presence rather than planning, connection rather than calculation. They found a table in the sunshine, dogs settling beneath it as a server approached with menus. The normalcy of the moment, lunch on a beautiful day with pleasant company, struck Eleanor with its unfamiliarity. When was the last time she'd done something this ordinary, this unscheduled, this human?
So, have I completely torpedoed our potential friendship with my philosophical overreaching? Or is there hope for redemption through chickpea wraps?
His self-deprecating question carried just the right note of humor to break through the last of her defensiveness.
I suppose that depends on whether these wraps live up to their billing.
The pressure is immense. My entire social future hangs in the balance.
Eleanor found herself smiling despite her lingering unease. There was something disarming about his willingness to acknowledge the awkwardness, to name it rather than pretend it wasn't there. The server placed 2 steaming plates on their table, the aroma of spices immediately filling the air between them.
So, the moment of truth.
He gestured toward her wrap with a small flourish.
Will the legendary chickpea curry live up to its reputation?
Eleanor took a bite, the complex mixture of flavors, warm spices, bright herbs, a hint of citrus, unfolding on her tongue. A small sound of appreciation escaped her before she could suppress it.
Exactly. That little is what keeps the chef going through the dark nights of the soul.
It's good. Very good.
She took another bite, savoring it properly this time.
Though I'm not sure anything warrants the phrase life-changing culinary experience.
Give it time. Paradigm shifts don't happen instantly.
Their table fell into a momentary comfortable silence as they both enjoyed the first bites of their food. Eleanor found her shoulders dropping slightly, the tension from their earlier exchange dissipating in the simple pleasure of good food and sunshine.
All right, serious question.
He leaned forward, expression suddenly grave.
Desert island scenario. You can only bring 3 books. What are they?
That's your serious question?
It reveals more about a person than you might think.
Fine.
She considered for a moment, dabbing her mouth with a napkin.
To Kill a Mockingbird, Pride and Prejudice, and
She hesitated on the third choice, surprising herself with her answer.
Where the Wild Things Are.
Really? Children's book for your desert island?
My mother read it to me every night for a year when I was 4. I had it memorized.
The memory surfaced unexpectedly, bringing with it the scent of her mother's perfume, the sound of her voice changing for each wild thing.
I found her copy when I was clearing out her apartment last year. The pages are falling out, but I couldn't bear to throw it away.
Something in Leo's expression softened, the teasing glint replaced by genuine interest.
That's beautiful. Books as memory vessels.
What about you? You're 3?
He took a sip of water, considering.
Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner, 100 Years of Solitude, and The Complete Calvin and Hobbes.
A comic? That's cheating.
It's literature, just with pictures, and philosophy, and talking tigers.
Eleanor found herself laughing, the sound surprising her with its ease.
So children's books are fair game for both of us. Interesting.
The best children's books speak to adults too. That's why they endure.
Makes me wonder what Peanut would choose for his desert island library.
Based on his demonstrated interests? Probably field guides to rodents, military strategy, and high adventure.
And Apollo.
Poetry, definitely. Something Russian and soulful. He has that existential gaze.
They both looked down at the dogs, who had settled contentedly beneath the table, seemingly unconcerned with literary thought experiments.
I still can't believe how well they get along. Peanut usually takes weeks to warm up to other dogs.
Apollo's special talent, canine diplomacy.
He broke off a small piece of his wrap's edge, offering it discreetly to the husky beneath the table.
Don't tell anyone I'm undermining cafe policy.
Your secret's safe. Though I should warn you that feeding Peanut from the table is how my mother created a monster.
Duly noted. So your mom, she was a reader too.
Constantly. She taught literature at City College for 30 years. Our house was like a library annex.
That explains your impressive desert island selections. Literary DNA.
Only half. My father's a corporate tax attorney. Complete pragmatist. Books were for reference, not pleasure.
And which parent did you take after?
Eleanor paused, fork midway to her mouth, the question landing more personally than Leo had likely intended.
Everyone always assumed I took after my father. The structured thinking, the law career.
But
my mother used to say I had her heart and his head. Not sure what she meant by that exactly.
sounds like a compliment. Best of both worlds.
Eleanor took another bite, thinking about her mother's assessment. She'd never fully unpacked that particular description, had filed it away as just another of her mother's poetic observations.
What about this neighborhood? You said you've lived here a while?
5 years in my current apartment. I like how it's close to the river path for running.
The path is gorgeous. Apollo and I do the full loop on Sundays when the store's closed. There's that little bend just past the boathouse where you can see the entire skyline reflected in the water.
At sunrise, it's even better. The buildings catch the light in this golden pink glow.
Early riser?
Always have been. Even as a kid, I was up before everyone else.
Planning world domination while the rest of us were drooling into our pillows.
More like enjoying the quiet. Once everyone else is awake, the world gets so noisy.
Leo studied her for a moment, head tilted slightly.
I can see that. You strike me as someone who processes things deeply. Noise would interfere.
The observation, so casually delivered yet so unexpectedly accurate, caught Eleanor off guard. How had he pinpointed something about her that even close friends rarely recognized?
What about you? Early bird or night owl?
Depends on the book I'm reading. I've been known to see the sunrise from both directions.
That sounds terribly inefficient.
Gloriously so. Some books demand to be finished in one sitting. Sleep is negotiable. Finding out how the story ends is not.
Despite herself, Eleanor smiled, remembering nights from her college years when she'd done exactly that, reading until dawn, unable to put a book down until she'd reached the final page.
See? That smile means you understand completely.
Maybe once upon a time. These days, I'm more disciplined.
Disciplined is good, necessary even, but leaving room for the occasional all-night reading bender keeps life interesting.
Their conversation flowed easily from books to neighborhood haunts, from the quirks of their respective professions to the peculiar habits of their dogs. Leo described Apollo's uncanny ability to know exactly which customers needed canine therapy in the bookstore. Eleanor shared the story of Peanut's great escape from her mother's garden, which had resulted in a neighborhood-wide search, and his eventual discovery napping in a stranger's hammock.
So the wanderlust runs deep. No wonder he adapted so quickly to bookstore life.
Don't encourage him. I'm trying to instill some sense of discipline.
Some dogs just have adventure in their souls, like some people.
Eleanor looked up from her nearly empty plate, catching his eyes. There was no judgment in his expression, only warm observation.
And some of us prefer maps to uncharted territory.
Nothing wrong with maps. They're useful tools.
He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling.
As long as you remember they're not the actual terrain.
As their empty plates were cleared away, as Eleanor declined dessert but accepted another cup of coffee, as the sun shifted slightly to cast dappled shadows through the cafe's awning, she found herself genuinely relaxing in a way that felt foreign yet familiar. like revisiting a place she'd forgotten she once loved. It was in watching Leo's animated description of a customer who came in weekly to read to Apollo, in catching herself laughing at his impression of the husky's attentive head tilt, in the easy, unguarded way they'd shifted from strangers to something more in the space of a few days, that a certainty began to crystallize in Eleanor's mind. This man, with his bookstore categories and his volunteer work and his comfortable relationship with uncertainty, lived in a world fundamentally different from her own. A world where meaning trumped security, where process was valued over outcome, where the messy present held more weight than the carefully planned future. It was a world Eleanor had never allowed herself to consider viable. A world that presented a direct challenge to everything she'd built her identity around. As much as she enjoyed his company, perhaps because she enjoyed it more than she should, Eleanor knew with sudden clarity that pursuing any deeper connection would mean confronting questions about her own life she wasn't prepared to answer. Questions about what she truly valued, what she was willing to risk, who she might be beyond the carefully constructed professional identity that had defined her for so long.
Penny for your thoughts? Though given inflation, I should probably offer at least $1.
Eleanor looked up from her plate, realizing she'd fallen silent.
Just thinking about how quickly we form impressions of people. How much we think we can know based on such limited information.
Are we talking about my presumptuous again? Because I really am sorry about that.
No, it's broader than that.
She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the realization that was forming.
We come from very different worlds. See things very differently.
Is that a problem?
Not a problem, just a reality.
Something in her tone must have communicated more than her words, because Leo's expression shifted, a subtle understanding dawning behind his eyes.
That we should keep this professional conversation.
I didn't say that.
You didn't have to. It was there in the carefully constructed distance in your phrasing.
Eleanor felt a flash of irritation that he could read her so easily, coupled with a deeper discomfort that he might be seeing things about herself she wasn't ready to acknowledge.
I'm not in a position to complicate my life right now. The job search, the financial pressure, it's already more than I can comfortably manage.
And I represent complication.
It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway.
You represent a very different approach to life than the one I've built mine around.
Fair assessment.
I need stability right now. I need to focus on rebuilding what I lost.
Also fair.
His easy acceptance should have been a relief. Instead, it sparked an irrational disappointment that he hadn't argued, hadn't tried to persuade her otherwise.
So we're clear?
Crystal.
He reached for his water glass, voice deliberately casual.
Friends who occasionally share dog-sitting duties, no complications necessary.
Friends. The word should have felt like the perfect resolution. A clear boundary established, a potential problem averted before it could develop. Instead, it landed with a hollow finality that Eleanor chose not to examine too closely.
Exactly.
Beneath the table, Apollo and Peanut had settled together, the husky's larger body curled protectively around the dachshund. Their easy companionship stood in stark contrast to the careful distance their humans were now establishing above. The remainder of lunch passed pleasantly enough, their conversation shifting to safer topics, neighborhood changes, upcoming book releases, the peculiar weather patterns of early spring. If there was a new guardedness in Eleanor's responses, a deliberate maintenance of distance, Leo didn't comment on it. As they walked back to the bookstore, Eleanor found herself hyper-aware of the space between them, the careful non-touching of their arms even when the sidewalk narrowed, forcing them closer together. She had gotten what she wanted: clarity, boundaries, simplicity. So why did it feel like loss rather than relief?
I should probably warn you about this afternoon.
Warn me?
Friday afternoons have a certain energy at the store. The weekend reading crowd can get competitive.
Competitive book buying sounds like an oxymoron.
You'd be surprised. People get very territorial about the last copy of whatever bestseller they've been meaning to read.
As they rounded the corner, Cornerstone Books came into view, its green awning a welcome sight despite the complicated emotions now swirling beneath Eleanor's carefully maintained composure.
You're welcome to stay, of course. Apollo would never forgive me if I sent his new best friend away. But if you have other plans, I completely understand.
She did have other plans, very specific ones, meticulously scheduled on her kitchen calendar. The afternoon's task list waited, applications to be completed, emails to be sent, a life to be rebuilt according to the blueprint she'd always followed.
Actually, I should probably get going. I've imposed on your generosity enough.
Not an imposition, but I understand.
At the bookstore entrance, they paused. An awkward moment stretched between them, the usual social rhythms of parting suddenly complicated by the conversation they'd just had.
So, friends?
He extended his hand, the gesture both formal and gently teasing. Eleanor took it, his grip warm and solid against her palm.
Friends.
She released his hand perhaps a beat too quickly, suddenly conscious of the simple contact in a way she hadn't been before.
Thank you for lunch, and for watching Peanut.
Anytime. I mean that. Apollo's going to be inconsolable.
As if on cue, the husky looked up at the sound of his name, his blue eyes moving between the humans with what Eleanor could have sworn was understanding.
I'm sure he'll manage.
You underestimate the depth of canine emotional attachment.
He crouched down to Peanut's level, scratching behind the dachshund's ears.
It was an honor serving with you, Sir Digsby. Your mouse patrol techniques are unparalleled.
Despite herself, Eleanor smiled at the formal address, at the way Peanut's tail wagged in apparent appreciation of the recognition.
Come on, Sir Digsby, time to go.
With a final nod to Leo, she turned, Peanut trotting obediently at her side. She managed to make it to the corner before giving in to the urge to look back. Leo stood in the doorway of Cornerstone Books, one hand raised in farewell, Apollo sitting beside him. For a moment, framed by the weathered brick and green awning, they formed a picture of such perfect belonging that Eleanor felt a sharp, unexpected pang somewhere beneath her ribs. Different worlds, she reminded herself as she continued walking. The phrase had become a sort of mantra, a necessary reminder of the reality she'd acknowledged over lunch. Different worlds, different priorities, different directions. It was the right decision, the practical decision, the only decision that made sense given her current situation and what she needed to rebuild. Friends was the perfect resolution, a clear boundary that allowed for pleasant interaction without the complications of anything deeper. So why, as she walked away from Cornerstone Books, did the victory of clarity feel so hollow? Back in her apartment, Eleanor moved through the remainder of her day with mechanical efficiency, ticking items off her schedule with grim determination. Applications completed, emails sent, professional development articles read and annotated, each task performed with her usual precision, if not her usual focus. Peanut watched her from his cushion in the corner of her home office, his gaze following her movements with unusual attentiveness. When she finally closed her laptop at 6:30 p.m., he approached, resting his chin on her knee in an uncharacteristic gesture of canine concern.
I'm fine,
she told him, her voice sounding unconvincing even to her own ears.
Just tired. It's been a long week.
The dachshund maintained his position, brown eyes fixed on her face.
Don't look at me like that. It was the right decision. The only decision.
Peanut tilted his head, the gesture so reminiscent of Apollo's questioning gaze that Eleanor felt that same strange pang beneath her ribs.
It would never work. We're too different. He's all chaos and adaptation and living in the moment. And
She stopped herself, suddenly aware that she was trying to justify her decision to a dog. A dog who, by all evidence, would have voted for continued bookstore adventures rather than practical boundary setting.
This is ridiculous. I barely know him.
And yet, as she moved through her evening routine, dinner eaten while reviewing a legal journal, dishes washed and put away immediately, clothes laid out for morning, Eleanor found her thoughts continually drifting back to Cornerstone Books, to the eclectic organization system that revealed so much about its creator, to the easy way Leo had connected with each customer, each child, each dog, to the casual confidence with which he moved through his chosen life, apparently unconcerned with conventional measures of success. Different worlds, different values, different paths. She repeated these facts to herself as she prepared for bed, as she checked her phone one last time for emails that might contain job offers, as she set her alarm for 5:30 a.m., day 29 complete. Tomorrow would be day 30 of her unexpected detour. A nice round number that should have felt like a milestone but instead hung over her like a verdict. 30 days without income. 30 days of applications and interviews and carefully worded follow-up emails. 30 days of a life suspended between what was and what would be. As sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor's last conscious thought was of Leo's response when she'd mentioned her public defender application. That flash of genuine appreciation, that recognition of something in her she rarely acknowledged herself. Not her credentials or her work ethic, but a capacity for meaningful advocacy, for making a difference beyond billable hours and corporate clients. Different worlds, indeed. And in the liminal space between waking and dreaming, Eleanor wasn't entirely certain which one she truly belonged in anymore. Chapter 6. Calculated Coincidences. Eleanor arrived at Maggie's apartment precisely 7 minutes past 7, her tardiness calculated to appear casual rather than rude. In one hand, she carried a bottle of reasonably priced Malbec. In the other, a leash attached to Peanut, who had insisted on bringing his favorite squeaky toy, a well-worn plush squirrel that had seen better days.
"You're late,"
Maggie declared as she opened the door, her tone contradicting the warm smile spreading across her face.
"I was about to send out a search party. Or at least order without you.
7 minutes hardly constitutes a crisis.
For Eleanor Washington? It's practically a personality transplant."
Eleanor rolled her eyes but didn't contradict her friend. She'd met Maggie during her first year at law school, when they'd been assigned as roommates despite vastly different academic pursuits. While Eleanor had spent her evenings color-coding case briefs, Maggie had been memorizing anatomical structures with equal intensity, but considerably more coffee and considerably less sleep. They'd bonded over shared perfectionism, if not shared methods. Maggie's apartment reflected her personality. Eclectic, slightly chaotic, but with an underlying order only visible to those who knew where to look. Medical journals occupied the same shelves as vintage comic books. Chef-quality kitchen tools shared space with takeout menus from every restaurant within delivery radius. It was a space that shouldn't work but somehow did, much like their friendship.
"Bailey's in the bedroom. I thought the dogs might enjoy a proper dinner without canine distractions."
I should warn you that Peanut's table manners are still evolving.
"You mean he's a food thief?"
I prefer opportunistic gastronome.
Maggie laughed, leading the way to her small but well-appointed kitchen, where delicious aromas suggested she'd gone beyond her usual dinner party repertoire of pasta and pre-made sauce.
"I'm trying a new recipe. Thai basil chicken. There's a 50% chance it's inedible, but the wine should compensate."
It smells amazing.
"Flattery will get you nowhere, but wine and cheese will get you everywhere."
She gestured toward a small arrangement of cheeses on the counter.
"Help yourself while I finish up."
Eleanor poured them each a glass of wine before settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. It felt good to be here, away from her apartment with its silent reminder of pending applications and dwindling savings. Away from the mental loop of Friday's conversation with Leo, which had been replaying in her mind with frustrating persistence.
"So,
Maggie began, stirring something that sizzled promisingly.
How's the job search? Any word from the 42nd floor?
Not yet. They said next week.
And you're still applying elsewhere? Keeping options open?
5 applications this week alone, plus networking follow-ups.
Good. Because if they don't recognize your brilliance, someone else will.
Eleanor smiled, warmed as always by her friend's uncomplicated faith. Maggie had never doubted that Eleanor would land on her feet, had never once suggested that her unemployment might extend beyond a temporary setback. It was a confidence Eleanor found herself borrowing on the darker days of her job search.
And how's your literary friend? The one with the husky?
The casual segue wasn't fooling anyone. Eleanor took a strategic sip of wine before responding.
Leo? Fine, I guess. I saw him yesterday.
Oh,
Maggie's voice carried a dangerous lilt of interest.
another interview?
No, just... Peanut enjoys the bookstore. Apollo's company.
And you enjoy the bookstore owner's company.
It's not like that.
Define that.
You know exactly what I mean.
Maggie turned from the stove, fixing Eleanor with her diagnostic gaze, the one that made ER patients immediately confess to whatever risky behavior had landed them in her care.
What I know is that you're deflecting, which means there's something to deflect from.
There's nothing to tell. We've established a friendly arrangement that works for both of us. End of story.
The single syllable managed to convey volumes of skepticism.
And this friendly arrangement, does it involve any activities beyond dog sitting?
We had lunch yesterday. A cafe near his store.
A lunch date?
A lunch. Between friends.
Friends you've known for, what, a week?
Is there a mandatory waiting period for friendship I wasn't aware of?
Maggie carried the now completed dish to the small dining table by the window, gesturing for Eleanor to join her. As they settled in, Peanut curled contentedly at Eleanor's feet, apparently sensing this conversation might take a while.
Elle, how long have we known each other?
10 years, 2 months, approximately 3 days.
And in that decade of friendship, have I ever seen you voluntarily spend time with someone you just met? Someone not directly related to work or school or some structured activity?
Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The answer was no, and they both knew it. Eleanor's circle had always been small, carefully curated, and slow to admit new members.
Your point being?
My point being that you've gone to this bookstore multiple times in a week, had lunch with its owner, are currently blushing about said lunch. This is not your standard operating procedure.
Maybe I'm evolving.
Or maybe you like him, and that terrifies you.
The directness of the statement caught Eleanor off guard. Leave it to Maggie to perform conversational surgery without anesthesia.
I barely know him.
Which is different from not liking him.
Eleanor sighed, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate with her fork.
He's interesting. Different.
Different how?
From anyone I know. From me.
She gathered her thoughts, trying to articulate the quality that made Leo simultaneously intriguing and unsettling.
He's so comfortable with uncertainty. With improvisation. When things go wrong, he just adapts. Finds the opportunity in the interruption.
The horror.
I'm serious. We're complete opposites in how we approach everything.
And that's a problem because
I'm trying to rebuild my life exactly as it was. And he represents everything that's not that life.
The words hung in the air between them, Eleanor surprised by the candor that had slipped past her usual filters. Perhaps it was the wine, or perhaps it was the growing recognition that her carefully maintained boundaries were more about fear than practicality.
have you considered that maybe that's exactly why you're drawn to him?
What do you mean?
Elle, I love you, but you've been trying to rebuild a life that wasn't making you happy even before Hargrove let you go.
That's not true. I was successful, respected.
And when was the last time you were excited to go to work? Not just satisfied with a job well done, but genuinely energized by what you were doing?
Eleanor stared at her wine glass, the question striking uncomfortably close to a truth she'd been avoiding. When had work last felt meaningful rather than just necessary?
That's not the point. The point is that I need stability now. I need to focus on the job search, not whatever this is.
And you've convinced yourself those are mutually exclusive.
Aren't they?
Only if you believe that your entire identity is wrapped up in your career. Only if you think that Eleanor Washington, corporate attorney, can't possibly be the same person as Eleanor Washington, woman who might enjoy the company of a bookstore owner who approaches life differently than she does.
Eleanor felt a flash of irritation, not at Maggie, but at the accuracy of her assessment. When had she started defining herself so narrowly? When had professional competence become the primary measure of her worth?
It's not just about career. It's about fundamental compatibility. He sees the world one way. I see it completely differently.
Maybe. Or maybe you're both looking at the same thing from different angles.
She refilled their wine glasses, her expression softening.
Look, I'm not saying marry the guy. I'm saying maybe don't automatically dismiss something that's clearly making your face light up for the first time in months.
My face is not lighting up.
It literally is. Right now. Just talking about him.
Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks, proving Maggie's point with frustrating accuracy.
We agreed to be friends. Just friends.
Ah, the dreaded friend zone discussion. Who initiated that particular conversation?
I did. Yesterday at lunch.
And how did he respond?
He agreed. Said we could be friends who occasionally shared dog-sitting duties. No complications necessary. What does that mean?
It means he sounds like someone who respects your boundaries, even if he might wish they were drawn differently.
You're inferring a lot from one sentence.
I'm a doctor. Inferring a lot from limited data is literally my job.
They ate in silence for a moment, Eleanor turning over Maggie's observations in her mind. Was it possible she'd been too quick to establish boundaries? Too ready to assume that any personal connection would derail her professional reconstruction?
Even if, and this is a hypothetical if, there was potential for something more, the timing is terrible. I need to focus on finding a job, not starting a relationship.
Because no employed person has ever successfully dated.
You know what I mean.
I do. And I also know that using your job search as a shield against potential emotional risk is a classic Eleanor Washington move.
The observation landed with uncomfortable precision.
When your mother died, you threw yourself into that Morrison case. Barely took time to grieve because the client needed you.
Maggie's voice was gentle despite the directness of her words.
Work has always been your safety zone. The place where the rules make sense and outcomes can be controlled.
Is that so wrong?
Not wrong, just incomplete.
She reached across the table, briefly squeezing Eleanor's hand.
The job stuff will sort itself out. You're brilliant and competent, and any firm would be lucky to have you. But maybe, just maybe, there's room for something else too. Something unscheduled.
Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, then at Peanut, who had fallen asleep beneath the table, snoring softly. The dachshund who had come into her life at the worst possible time, and yet had somehow become an essential part of it. The constant reminder that some of the best things couldn't be planned for or controlled, only accepted and adapted to.
He walks Apollo along the river path on Sunday mornings.
Interesting non sequitur.
He mentioned it yesterday. Said they do the full loop when the store is closed.
And this information is relevant because
I run that path every morning.
Maggie's smile spread slowly like dawn breaking.
Are you considering an accidental rendezvous, Eleanor Washington?
I'm considering maintaining my usual running schedule, which might or might not intersect with his walking route.
Of course, pure coincidence.
Exactly.
A carefully calculated coincidence.
I hate you a little bit right now.
No, you don't. You love me for giving you permission to do what you already wanted to do.
Eleanor couldn't deny the small flutter of anticipation that had taken up residence beneath her ribs. The prospect of seeing Leo again, outside the context of the bookstore, in the early morning light that always felt like a world apart from the rest of the day, it shouldn't be this appealing, and yet...
I haven't decided anything. I mean it.
I believe you completely.
Her tone made it clear she believed no such thing.
Now, let's talk about something else before you spontaneously combust from excessive planning of spontaneity.
They shifted to safer topics. Maggie's latest hospital drama, a book they'd both read, speculation about a mutual friend's new relationship. But beneath the easy conversation, Eleanor's mind kept returning to the river path, to Sunday mornings, to the possibility of an encounter that could be dismissed as coincidence, but might be something more deliberate, something approaching courage. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the early spring air carrying just enough chill to justify the light jacket Eleanor wore over her running clothes. She stood at her usual starting point along the river path, stretching with more thoroughness than her typical routine required. Peanut waited with unusual patience, his leash slack as he sniffed the morning air. Whether the dachshund sensed the deviation from their normal route or was simply enjoying the crisp morning, Eleanor couldn't say. But his calm presence steadied her own nerves, which hummed with an anticipation she refused to fully acknowledge.
This is ridiculous.
She informed Peanut as she checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes.
We're just running, like we do every morning.
The dachshund looked up at her, head tilted.
And if we happen to encounter someone we know, that's just urban probability.
Urban probability that had been carefully enhanced by her decision to start their run 30 minutes later than usual, and to take the longer loop that increased their chances of intersection. But these were merely practical adjustments to maximize efficiency, she told herself. Not a thinly veiled attempt to engineer a coincidental meeting.
Let's go before I talk myself out of this.
They set off at an easy pace, Eleanor deliberately keeping their speed moderate to extend their time on the path. The river stretched beside them, its surface catching the morning light in scattered diamonds. Weekend quiet had settled over this part of the city, the usual workday rush replaced by the occasional early jogger or dog walker. 3/4 of the way around the loop, just as Eleanor was beginning to think her calculations had been off, Peanut suddenly stiffened. His nose rose, testing the air, before he let out a series of excited yips that were decidedly undignified for a dog of his stature. Before Eleanor could react, he was straining at the leash, pulling her forward with surprising strength for his size. Around the bend, exactly where the path curved to reveal the city skyline reflected in the water's surface, 2 familiar figures came into view. Apollo spotted them first, his tall ears perking forward before he alerted Leo with a gentle nudge of his nose.
Well, what are the odds?
Leo's voice carried across the short distance between them, his smile visible even from yards away.
It's almost like running into coworkers outside the office. Weird but nice.
Eleanor's carefully prepared casual greeting dissolved into an actual smile, one that felt too genuine to be part of any strategic encounter.
Sunday morning obligation to exercise,
she said as they drew closer.
though we're usually out earlier.
Apollo refuses to acknowledge Sunday as a legitimate morning. Weekend sleep schedules are sacred in his religion.
As if on cue, Apollo stretched leisurely, looking as though he'd just rolled out of bed despite the hour. Peanut, meanwhile, was doing his best to entangle their leashes in his excitement, circling both humans as if to ensure they couldn't easily separate.
I think we're being conspired against by canine forces.
It would appear so.
She bent to untangle Peanut's leash, using the moment to collect herself. Up close, Leo looked different than he did in the bookstore. More relaxed, if that were possible. His usual rumpled sweater had been replaced by an equally worn zip-up hoodie over a faded t-shirt bearing the logo of some obscure band. His hair was even more chaotic than usual, as if he hadn't bothered to address it beyond running his fingers through it.
We were just about to stop at that bench near the boathouse, the one with the view I mentioned.
He gestured toward a spot further along the path.
Apollo needs regular contemplation breaks during our walks. Very philosophical husky.
It was an invitation wrapped in humor, offered with enough lightness that she could easily decline without awkwardness.
Sounds like Peanut could use a philosophical mentor. His current life approach involves charging headlong into everything.
The yin to Apollo's yang, cosmic balance.
They fell into step beside each other, dogs leading the way with what Eleanor could have sworn was triumphant body language.
So, how was the rest of your weekend? Productive, restorative, filled with thrilling legal adventures?
Dinner with a friend last night. Otherwise, the usual job search activities.
The elusive work-life balance, heavy on the work portion.
Says the man who volunteers on his day off.
Touché. Though I maintain that reading to kids barely counts as productive activity. It's mostly selfish on my part.
How so?
Their reactions are completely unfiltered. When a story works, you see it immediately. That total transportation to another world. When it doesn't,
He laughed softly.
they have no qualms about letting you know.
They reached the bench, positioned perfectly to capture the view Leo had described. The morning light hit the water at an angle that transformed the river's surface into a mirror, reflecting the city skyline with such perfect clarity that it created the illusion of a world doubled upon itself.
Oh,
Told you, worth the philosophical pit stop.
They sat, dogs settling at their feet. Apollo stretched out with a contented sigh, while Peanut, after a moment of restless investigation, surprised Eleanor by curling up beside the larger dog.
How did your friend react to Sir Digsby's bookstore adventures? Impressed by his literary aspirations?
amused by his sudden sociability. He's not usually this adaptable to new situations.
And is human? Is she similarly set in her ways?
The question carried no judgment, just gentle curiosity. Eleanor found herself considering her answer more carefully than the casual nature of their conversation would seem to warrant.
I've always been structured, even as a kid. My mother used to say I came out of the womb with a 5-year plan.
And was this structured approach a response to something, or just your natural state?
Again, the unexpected insightfulness of his question caught her off guard. Most people didn't look beyond the surface of her organizational tendencies, seeing only the efficiency without questioning its origins.
My father traveled constantly for work when I was young. Corporate law, international clients. My mother was the opposite. Creative, spontaneous, terrible with schedules. Someone had to make sure permission slips got signed and lunch money didn't get spent on books.
So you became the organized one.
By necessity, yes.
She watched a small boat making its way upriver, the gentle wake spreading in perfect symmetrical patterns behind it.
What about you? Were you born with that ability to roll with whatever comes, or did you develop it?
Probably a bit of both, though I wasn't always this way.
Something shifted in his expression, a momentary shadow across his usual openness.
I spent years in a world where control was everything, where deviations from plan were disasters rather than opportunities.
What changed?
I did. After a wake-up call that made me reevaluate everything.
He turned slightly, meeting her gaze directly.
My former business partner had a heart attack at 42, right in the middle of a presentation about quarterly projections. One minute he was talking about leveraging market inefficiencies, the next he was on the floor.
That's terrible. Did he...
He survived. Barely. Triple bypass. Months of recovery. And you know what he said to me the first time I visited him in the hospital?
Leo's voice had taken on an intensity she hadn't heard before.
Make sure Johnson doesn't mess up the Westridge account while I'm out.
Eleanor winced. She'd known partners at Hargrove with similar priorities. People whose identities were so entwined with their professional achievements that even health crises barely registered as interruptions to their career trajectories.
That was my moment of clarity. Looking at this brilliant, driven man in a hospital bed, still unable to see beyond the next deal, the next client, the next acquisition, I realized I was on exactly the same path.
So you left finance.
Eventually, yes. But first I tried to change from within the system, reduce my hours, take actual vacations, set boundaries.
He smiled, though the expression held more irony than humor.
The firm saw these changes as signs I was losing my edge, not hungry enough anymore.
I know exactly what that's like.
I figured you might.
His gaze was knowing, empathetic without being pitying.
There's a certain type of environment where anything less than total dedication is seen as weakness. And the irony is, the people judging you for establishing boundaries are usually the most miserable themselves.
The observation resonated with uncomfortable accuracy. Eleanor thought of the senior partners at Hargrove, their designer suits and luxury cars and empty personal lives. The way they spoke about commitment to the firm as if it were a moral virtue rather than a professional choice.
So you walked away.
I did. Best decision I never planned to make.
And you don't miss it? The stability, the clear metrics for success, the
ulcers, the insomnia, the relationships that withered because I was always just finishing one more thing.
He shook his head.
Sometimes I miss the clarity of purpose. The world of finance is very black and white in some ways. Numbers either add up or they don't. But mostly I'm grateful to have escaped before I became someone who'd prioritize a client account over my own heartbeat.
They fell silent, watching the river's flow. Apollo had rested his head on Leo's shoe, while Peanut had entered the deep sleep phase that always followed his initial burst of morning energy.
I don't know if I could do that. Walk away from everything I've built.
Who says you have to? There's a difference between recalibrating your relationship with work and abandoning your skills.
Maybe. Though the job market isn't exactly accommodating to people seeking recalibration.
Fair point. Though I've found that when one door refuses to budge, sometimes the answer isn't to push harder but to look for a window.
Before Eleanor could respond, a jogger approached, followed closely by a large golden retriever whose resemblance to Bailey was striking. As they passed, Peanut suddenly jerked awake, apparently startled by the proximity of the larger dog. In his confusion, he bolted forward, directly into the path of a cyclist neither of them had noticed approaching from the opposite direction.
Whoa.
Eleanor lunged for Peanut's leash, but Leo was faster. In one fluid motion, he scooped the dachshund from the path, narrowly avoiding both the cyclist and a collision with Eleanor. The moment happened so quickly that Eleanor found herself standing with one arm extended, Peanut safely cradled against Leo's chest, their bodies suddenly much closer than they had been moments before.
Looks like someone needs a refresher course in pedestrian safety.
His voice was light, teasing, but Eleanor barely registered the words. Instead, she was acutely aware of the minuscule distance between them, of Leo's hand steadying her elbow, where she'd almost lost her balance in the confusion, of the morning sunlight catching in his eyes, revealing flecks of gold she hadn't noticed before.
Thank you. He's not usually so...
Spontaneous? Maybe he's evolving too.
There it was again, that perception that saw beyond her surface to the currents moving beneath. Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his face, from the gentle amusement there, the warmth that invited rather than mocked. A heartbeat passed, then another. Neither moved to increase the space between them.
Maybe we both are.
The words emerged without conscious permission, quiet enough that they might have been carried away by the breeze coming off the river. But Leo heard them. She could tell by the way his expression shifted, surprise giving way to something more complex, more hopeful.
Evolution is highly recommended. 5 stars. Would evolve again.
The joke broke the moment's tension, allowing Eleanor to step back slightly, to reclaim Peanut and the composure that had momentarily deserted her. But something had changed in that brief intersection of movement and realization. A boundary had shifted, not disappeared but become more permeable.
We should probably resume our respective exercise regimens before these two get any more ideas about traffic interference.
Probably wise. Though I have it on good authority that the cafe near the north entrance to the path makes exceptional Sunday morning coffee. If your regimen could accommodate a brief caffeine interlude.
Eleanor glanced at her watch, a gesture so automatic she didn't register it until she caught Leo's knowing smile.
Let me guess, you have a schedule to maintain.
Actually, I was checking to see if we have time for both coffee and the extended river loop. If you and Apollo are up for it.
The surprise that flashed across his face was worth the small step outside her carefully maintained boundaries. So was the genuine pleasure that followed it.
I think Apollo could be persuaded to extend his philosophical wanderings, especially if pastries are involved.
Pastries weren't part of the original proposition.
Evolution often involves unexpected benefits.
As they gathered their things, dogs rousing themselves with varying degrees of enthusiasm, Eleanor felt a lightness that had been absent from her carefully structured days. The river continued its flow beside them, the city its mechanical rhythm across the water. But here, in this small pocket of Sunday morning quiet, something new had begun to take root. Something unscheduled but not unwelcome. A carefully calculated coincidence that just might lead somewhere neither of them had planned.